Good afternoon. My name is James Keegan, K-E-E-G-A-N, and I am the Chief of Police for the City of St. Charles. I am joined today by State's Attorney Jamie Masser from the King County State's Attorney's Office, along with a host of law enforcement agencies that joined St. Charles Police in working on this investigation. Jamie and I will read some prepared remarks, and at the conclusion of those remarks, we will then entertain questions. In the early spring, a brothel or house of prostitution was determined to be operating in an apartment in St. Charles on our near west side. A protracted investigation revealed this brothel was part of a larger criminal enterprise that also operated within Aurora, Chicago, Elgin, Hanover Park, unincorporated Palatine, and South Elgin. St. Charles Police took the lead on this investigation and ultimately executed several search warrants in some of the aforementioned communities. A total of 10 women were taken into protective custody yesterday morning and are being placed in transitional housing. One of those women was treated at a local hospital and released. The investigation determined each of these women were victims of human trafficking. 4 males and 1 woman have thus far been charged with numerous counts of involuntary servitude, trafficking in persons, and promoting prostitution. Some of these charges are Class X felonies and send a strong message to those contemplating similar behavior that this will not be tolerated within our communities by law enforcement or prosecutors. Evidence seized indicates prostitution via human trafficking was taking place as part of a larger organized crime syndicate in which women were brought into the United States for the sole purposes of being victimized and exploited. These subjects knowingly profited from prostitution by arranging or offering to arrange a situation in which a person may practice prostitution by procuring a location and then transporting women to that location and advertising those women to clients for the purposes of commercial sexual activity. I would now like to introduce King County State's Attorney Jamie Masser.
Good afternoon. Human trafficking involves the use of force, fraud, or coercion to obtain some type of labor or commercial sex act. Every year, millions of men, women, and children are trafficked worldwide, and this includes Kane County. It happens in every community with victims of all ages, races, gender, or nationality. This is a systemic problem that needs our focus in law enforcement on stopping the traffickers from continuing their criminal enterprise and helping victims to find resources. According to the U.S. Department of State, approximately 27.6 million people are trafficked each year. This was a multi-jurisdictional collaboration with prosecutors and law enforcement to remove the victims from these traffickers and to charge those traffickers with offenses commensurate to their acts. The following defendants were charged: Daniel Hurtado, Christian Hurtado, Martha Hurtado Hernandez, Rigoberto Parra, and Hector Braceno. All 5 were charged with the following offenses: involuntary servitude, which is a Class X felony, trafficking in persons, which is a Class 1 felony, involuntary servitude, which is a Class 1 felony, of which 3 counts were charged, involuntary servitude charged in an alternative way, which is a Class 4 felony of 7 counts each, and promoting prostitution, a Class 4 felony, 4 counts. I am extremely grateful for the collaboration with all of our offices. I would also like to specifically commend Kane County First Assistant Christine Baer for her efforts in this collaboration. She is one of the first people to have prosecuted defendants under the Illinois human trafficking statute, securing several convictions for people who had done this here in Kane County. Her expertise and knowledge in this area assisted law enforcement in the extensive investigation and execution of multiple search warrants that resulted in the charges as stated. I would also like to thank both the Kane County State's Attorney's Office Forensic Division and the Attorney General's Office, who provided members of their forensic unit to collect and analyze the digital evidence immediately as we were going through this process. I would also like to commend the St. Charles Police Department, who recognized this as a human trafficking situation and not one in which they were simply going to charge people with sex acts where it turns victims into offenders. At this time, I would like to go ahead and turn this back over to Chief Keegan.
Thank you, State's Attorney Masser. I too would like to thank all of my officers and those from Aurora, Elgin, the Cook County Sheriff's Office, Hanover Park, the Illinois Attorney General's Office, the Illinois State Police, the Lake County Sheriff's Office, and South Elgin for their work in this investigation. This was truly a team effort. This investigation spanned several months and is the culmination of excellent work done by our investigators. Everyone worked tirelessly on this case and sought justice for those without a voice. Your efforts and dedication are not in vain. More information will be forthcoming as this investigation continues. Press packets have been circulated and digital copies are available. I would now like to turn it back to State's Attorney Jamie Masser for additional comments, and we will answer questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. As evidenced by this, Kane County is dedicated to working collaboratively not only with the law enforcement within our jurisdiction, but law enforcement throughout the state of Illinois. We must identify human trafficking as quickly as we can and get involved to stop this behavior from happening. This is just the beginning of the work that the Kane County State's Attorney's Office, in partnership with our law enforcement, will continue to do to identify these human trafficking enterprises and put a stop to them, making our community safer overall. At this time, all 5 defendants are in our bond court in Kane County. The information about what those bonds will be set will be forthcoming to all of you. We are welcome to answer any questions regarding this. There will be times that we may not be able to answer it given the rules that we have regarding this, but if you have questions, we're open to that now.
State's Attorney, are they in bond court currently?
Currently, as we speak, yes. All 5. So to my knowledge, 2 of them have been completed, 3 are ongoing. When I left, they had started a special bond call at 3 p.m.
You know what happened to the 2 that were completed?
The one I know received a $5 million bond. I cannot tell you which individual that was. I can tell you that that will be the request for every single defendant that goes before the court.
You can say one is at least being held on $1 million.
$5 million.
Excuse me, I apologize.
No apologies necessary.
Thank you. Can you talk to us about, so this, it was an apartment in St. Charles, but you also mentioned all these other communities.
Mhm.
Can you talk about, were there other locations where victims were found, where the suspects were just living, or how did all those other communities come to?
You know, it's a great question. So once the information came to our attention, we started conducting our investigation, and that quickly led us to multiple locations throughout Chicagoland. Each of those municipalities and jurisdictions were notified, and then as the investigation continued, obviously it resulted in the arrest that we bring before you today.
Did you find victims in those locations?
So at most of those locations, there was a number of municipalities I mentioned. 10 total victims were recovered. There was about 2 or so victims in each of the locations I mentioned, and each of those victims were taken into protective custody and provided social services.
But it seemed like it seemed like the hub was here in St. Charles?
Not necessarily. Quite frankly, it was really good investigative work by our detectives, but once we became aware of the situation and commenced our investigation, we quickly determined it was taking place elsewhere. We believe the enterprise itself was organized in another municipality, and then there was branches of that organization in some of the suburbs I mentioned.
Can you guess as to how long this has been going on?
We became aware of it in the early spring, but as far as how long it had been taking place, that quite frankly is unknown at this time.
Is it possible that there might be other victims that you guys have not been able to reach at this point or uncover?
We anticipate that. This is an ongoing investigation. We're continuing to work with our partners, and we expect some additional information to be forthcoming in this, to include other suspects and potentially other victims.
And Chief, can you say how old the victims are, what their age range is?
Each of the 10 victims recovered, all are adults over the age of 18. I believe the ages range from early 20s to a little over 30 years of age, but none of which were minors.
And they were all women?
All women, correct.
Chief, it appears some of the suspects might be related. Is that the case? Is this a family that was involved in this?
Of the 5 charged, 2 are related. They're brothers.
And then what countries are these victims coming from? How did that happen?
Each of the victims that we've recovered are from South America, various parts of South America, but they were flown into the United States and then trafficked throughout different jurisdictions, Obviously, the ones that I've listed are just a few of those.
Do you anticipate to find even more suspects in this case as well?
This is ongoing, and I anticipate that this will branch out into other investigations where we potentially might locate other victims and then suspects as well.
Is Homeland Security involved?
We're working with a number of partners. We've branched out. I've listed most of them. There's a few others that we're continuing to work with.
It's also important to know that if anyone has any information on this, that information should be turned over to their local law enforcement, which would include St. Charles if it's here. We do have Elgin Police here, as well as the Cook County Sheriff's Office, all of which have worked together. So if people are aware of instances, or if they even suspect something happening, they should say something and give that to law enforcement as soon as possible so that they can then track down and do the investigations, much like what they did now.
Chief, what led you first to that brothel in St. Charles?
You know, some information came forward to our investigators, and then good old-fashioned police work followed. Surveillance, interviews, and really just staying on what came to our attention, and that obviously snowballed into what we bring forth today.
Chief, the one woman who had to be treated at a local hospital, is there any information that you can give? Was it
She was treated and released. She was complaining of abdominal pain and spent a couple of hours in the emergency room and then was released.
So this appears to be a human trafficking, sex trafficking ring. But would you call it both human trafficking and sex trafficking?
I think they're one and the same. A lot of times it's synonymous with one another, but yeah, this is an unfortunate issue that confronts our society, and like the state's attorney mentioned, I think it's everywhere within our communities, and I really applaud our investigators and the agencies that we worked with, along with the prosecutors that helped us bring this case to a conclusion.
The other jurisdictions, were they all apartments? Were they massage facilities? Were they houses?
Each were private residential areas, most were apartments.
We kind of just touched on this, but can you go further about just the gravity of this and how this was so, you know, you got one location and then you started digging and it just turned into something that was all over and connected and more of an enterprise than just one location. We know bad things happen in every community, but just about, you know, how big and how widespread this was?
Yeah, you know, it spanned several months, and it was like an onion. The more we peeled it back, the more it stunk. And this is something that's prevalent in society, and society can't tune a deaf ear to it. I really applaud the work we did with the State Attorney's Office and our partners, because each of the agencies worked around the clock tirelessly to not only rescue these victims, but also hold the offenders and the people responsible accountable.
How did the victims react?
We had mixed reactions. They were very grateful for our services, but there was mixed reactions as far as their dealings with the aftermath of this.
Backgrounds on the five? Was there anything like this in the backgrounds?
No, not that we have found that they have been charged with anything else or have any criminal history. What we do know upon investigating all of this is extremely widespread, and when we find this out, we see how connected it is to other jurisdictions. A lot of times when law enforcement goes in, especially if they focus on this for what the victim is doing and they consider it a sex act and they charge them with prostitution, all that causes is the traffickers to get up and go into a different location. What the officers did in this case is monumental because they didn't focus on that part, they focused on eliminating the trafficking. And from that, we are going to see more victims and we are going to see more traffickers. Our forensic evidence is going to show us how widespread this is and how it's going to affect even more communities than our. This is a pervasive issue throughout every community, and I am very happy that here in Kane County and with our partners, of course, we take this as serious as it should be and in the right way.
What kind of jail time would these people face if convicted?
If convicted, the most serious offense is a Class X felony, which means it's a minimum of 6 years and a maximum of 30 years. As we go through this, we have multiple victims, so there's always the possibility of things being extended terms, so we are looking at a number of years.
How did they advertise? How did someone know where to go to these private apartments, residences?
A lot of this was word of mouth at a number of locations in greater Chicagoland. We did recover at one location some evidence of maybe some business cards being passed out and circulated, but for the most part, this was word of mouth and circulated amongst a number of underground communities.
Are the suspects illegal aliens or U.S. citizens?
Go ahead.
We've worked with Immigration Customs Enforcement. We're actually doing that as we speak through the bond hearing process and fingerprints and identification. So we will make sure that we continue to work with them to determine their visa status and citizenship.
If someone is unfamiliar with how this works, how would you know something was wrong enough to report it?
So there are a lot of identifiers with this. When you're looking at whether or not a business is a legitimate business, one of the ways that you look at it is whether or not it's being run out of an apartment or a house versus a business area. So in this particular case, this was a brothel being put out as something more, which would not be normal for an apartment. You also have to look at different ways. And a lot of these businesses, there's signs. When the businesses are completely covered in their front windows so you can't see what's going on, or the type of clientele that goes back and forth, that starts to show that there's an indication of this. When there seems to be a lot of different employees coming back and forth and there's not a lot of consistency, again, it means they're moving them around. There are a lot of human trafficking websites that we will send out with our press release that show the indicators of what people should look at if they believe that it's a potential human trafficking issue. What I always tell people, it is better to tell law enforcement that you have a suspicion and let them do their job. If they find that it is a legitimate business, then there's no harm that's caused. But what happens is when people report issues like this and the investigation is done by trained officers, we find issues like this and eliminate something that is horrific. What these 5 individuals have done to these victims, and just the victims that we know so far, is something that we have put a stop to right now by this reaction, by the investigation, and by the prosecution of these individuals.
You found out about this in early spring. How long had it been going on? Any idea?
We're really unsure, but I want to just echo what the state attorney just mentioned. You know, we like to use the term, if you see something, say something, call 911. Nobody knows an area or a neighborhood better than those that live there. So if you're scratching your head and you're wondering, boy, that's a lot of traffic in and out of that apartment or that house, maybe I should call the police. You probably just answered the question for yourself. And I think that's the message here, that if you see something, say something, notify authorities, and let us do our jobs, and that's what happened in this case. Okay, well, thank you all for coming. We will have digital packets available. Please leave your business cards or contact information. We'll make sure we send that out via the state